In spite of his barbaric name, the Brute is really just your local friendly fix-it man, who happens to believe in percussive troubleshooting. Follow this guide and you too can fix all of your Wartale problems with a hammer. Today's guide is going to be everything Brute, looking at all of his specialization options, the upgrades to these skills through skill mastery tomes. We'll also be touching on his different equipment options, alchemical advantages that you can wrangle up for yourself, and synergies with other companions. I am incredibly excited for doing the Brute guide here because I have what I think is the most creative build I have ever come up for one of these classes. We'll be opening up the video showcasing that build, but you can always check the timestamps if you want to jump around to something specific. The Brute is an entirely melee focused damage dealer, using strength to be able to deal his damage, so strength and constitution are our most important stats. I always like taking a splash of movement to be able to get to the exact points in battle that I need them to be, and there is a slight synergy with critical damage, so if you like seeing large yellow numbers, you can always grab a little bit of critical hit. The specializations of Vanguard and Smasher both give us access to medium armor. Destroyer lets you go all the way up to heavy armor, but I really value the mobility, so honestly if I was running a Destroyer, I'd still put medium armor on them. We're going to save scum a little bit to be able to showcase all of these different abilities and their upgrades, but first off we're going to go down the route of Smasher specialization, gaining extra strength here. We're going to pick up a Valorous Chain for our Valor Point generation, and then we're going to pop over to Cruelty, and as we upgrade these, we'll break down these skills. The goal of this build is to turn our friend Odo here into a bartender, mixing up the most lethal cocktail of damage over time effects possible. With a little bit of help from RNG, we will be able in a single round to apply so many damage over time effects to an enemy that they will be taking over 50% of their health as damage at the end of their turn. To be able to facilitate this, we have grabbed Poison Impact, deals 31 damage to the units in the area. That is 100% of your strength, and it applies 2 stacks of poison to bleeding units, and as we upgrade it on a fatal blow, it will cause a cloud of poison to appear where the enemy was killed. The cloud of poison upgrade is not a real exciting use of a skill mastery tome. It's not going to be game changing, and honestly, if you're not careful about where the clouds of poison are, it can affect you just as much as the enemies. But if you are really careful about where they are and have some enemy knock around effects, such as the Hunter's Bow or a lot of Spearmen, then you can get a lot of good use out of them. Going up to our passive, which is Cruelty, damage and critical hit is increased by 20% against units with at least 1 debuff. And as we gain the mastery for that, then in return, they deal 20% less damage to you. This is amazing for increasing our damage and durability if we have him off on a flank trying to deal with a number of enemies all around him, which is the perfect situation that we want for applying all these status effects. To make this build really sing, we have to use the Legion two-handed hammer, which will apply bleeding if we strike enemies on their armor. Bleeding is incredibly powerful here in Wartales and is also a fairly rare status effect to be able to use. This is one of the most reliable ways to be able to put that bleeding status effect out, and it synergizes perfectly with Poison Impact. There was clearly, these were two meant to be played in tandem. We have to turn to Alchemy to complete the build. It's getting very specific, but I love this combination. Taking the Acidic Oil will give us a 20% chance of applying burning to our targets every time we deal damage, and then we will grab the Concentrate to be able, if I'm reading this correctly, to bring us up to a 50% chance of applying burning on our attacks. Because we have the beautiful 1-2 punch of using the basic into Poisoned Impact, that should mean that we can very reliably apply burning to the enemies, leaving them poisoned, bleeding, and burning, which all together is going to just devastate their health pool. We've chosen to pick a fight with some level 6 soldiers here, so the most durable enemies we could possibly go up against, which is perfect to be able to showcase this build because our damage is shifted toward damage over time effects, which is all percentile health based. The stronger our enemies are, the more damage we will be able to do. We want to position very carefully here for our opening, making sure that both abilities are able to strike both enemies. We are keying off of Valorous Chain to be able to generate Valor points, and it is crucial that Poison Impact is striking multiple enemies. So we open up armor crushing, damage on the armor, we've applied bleeding. Here's the big one. 2 Valor points is a big ask, but this ability has to do some serious work for us. And there we go. So we crush this guy with a crit. So he's down to 0 armor. We've actually managed to damage his health a little bit in this opening engage, and we've applied 4 stacks of poison to both enemies. This is a nuance of Poison Impact that you don't necessarily pick up from the tooltip, but it applies to each enemy, 2 stacks of poison per bleeding enemy hit. So if we had just struck one enemy, they would only get 2 stacks of poison. But because we hit 2 bleeding enemies, we applied 4 stacks of poison to both of them. Now, we did not manage to apply burning to either of them, which is unfortunate because we have taken both the bleeding and the poison mastery upgrades through the knowledge tree. This puts them at taking 49% of their health as damage, tragically short of 50%. And this is not actually going to show in the tooltips, but that has been accurate across my testing. This is where if we had a rogue as a poisoner, my rogue is an assassin, but Loki could still potentially help out here to put them over the top. And I also have the flaming bow on my archer to be able to give us a little bit of an assist. So while Odo here did not manage to apply the burning, we'll still get burning over here to be able to showcase the horrifically damaging combo that you can get if you have all 3 of the status effects stacked up like this. Spearman wants his revenge and takes 35 damage. If you're adding that into all the damage that Odo already did, you see why the damage ceiling for this build is so high. Now, Loki, I'm going to keep Loki out. We're going to let the status effects just tick off on these enemies to be able to show off what that damage over time can really do, and we're instead going to engage the enemy captain. I don't like them being able to cross the entire battlefield. Here comes one of the important turns that we want to watch. Our foot soldier up here in the corner is now going to counterattack against Odo, and he takes 68 damage. Unfortunately, a poison bomb out of the poisoner specialization on the ranger, adding 3 stacks of poison, would not be enough. It's going to be a pretty big ask to try and stack up 100% health damage before the enemy takes their turn. Though if you guys have managed to pull that off, do let me know in the comments. Now we come to an interesting decision point in the build. Both enemies are low health and their turns are coming up in the order. This guy first and then this guy a little bit later. We could take Odo's turn now to be able to finish them off on our turn before they get to take any actions. The alternative is we wait on using Odo for the status effects to finish them off, and then Odo is left with no enemies around him, and he would be free to move and engage yet another group of enemies. With the way the battle is spread out right now, he doesn't have a great secondary option to engage somebody else, so I think we're going to go now to be able to finish these guys off, even though it means that all these status effects we stacked up only managed to take for 1 turn. They were still quite impressive while they were working. I am sorry, little ranger, you thought you were the king of status effects, but no, it was the brute all along. And now at this point we are galvanized, so our damage is just going to be through the roof, but we gotta be able to show off what Odo can really do here. Yes, 62 damage, and there is the lethal strike, applying the poison cloud, meaning that we get an extra application of poison. It does open up some interesting combat situations where you could be trying to play for that poison cloud. As we see, we poisoned ourselves with the cloud, so I don't love it, but that stack of status effects against the enemies is absolutely crazy. Let me know in the comments if you guys can think of any ways to potentially improve that status effect heavy build. I feel like the weak link really is the oil. We don't trigger burning as much as I would like. It really doesn't feel like I get it 50% of the time. So the math might be a little bit different, might be a little bit of funny math going on there, or just something, potentially the belt accessory to increase the hit chance is actually not working. But even with that minor frustration, I think the build still shows tremendous damage output. If this guide's been helpful to you guys, leave a like and subscribe if you want to make sure you see my future character guides as soon as they come out. The next build we're going to showcase is grabbing Vanguard specialization, once more grabbing Valorous Chain, hoping to tag multiple enemies with our relentless charges, and then Opportunism as our passive. Relentless Charge allows us to disengage and charge in a straight line, dealing 14 damage to the units on the trajectory and applying slowdown, cutting their movement by half for a single round. Gaining the skill mastery here means that if at the end of the turn we are next to an enemy, we gain Fury, meaning that the opening attack of our next round is going to deal 50% more damage. That once again feels like a mediocre skill mastery point to spend, but it does synergize with the passive that we have grabbed, Opportunism. As long as there are at least 2 enemies within 6 meters of this unit, 6 meters is a fairly large radius here in Wartales, we gain protection, meaning the damage that we take is reduced by 30%, and when we put the skill mastery here, if there are at least 4 enemies nearby, we also gain brutality, increasing our damage by 30%. The perfect scenario obviously being that if we can stack both fury and brutality, getting that 50 and then the 30 and keeping us in the center of a tight engagement using relentless charge to strike multiple enemies and triggering valorous chain frequently with that and the heavy swings from our hammer, we can really make this build come together. We're jumping into battle against a large group of bandits here. They are only level 3, so they're going to feel like pushovers compared to the guards that we were knocking around in the previous battle. But there are a lot of them, so hopefully we'll be able to form up a really tight engagement where our Vanguard build for Odo is able to take advantage of that relentless charge, punching through a bunch of enemies, cutting their movement down, allowing us to kite around and showcase the ceiling that that build can really have. Right now we're waiting for our opportunity within this clump of enemies to arise. Hopefully they will approach us a little bit more to be able to let Odo get right into the thick of things. Once they do, once we find our perfect opportunity, we'll hop over and showcase what he's got. Okay, the enemies have tightened up a little bit. This hoodlum is about to go, and he will be able to engage with Odo. And I don't necessarily want him locked up around this rock because you can't relentless charge through rocks. As you see, we get a 6-meter range, and you get that little width indicator of how many enemies are going to be able to be clipped by this charge. Now we want to finesse our position. We can... we want to be able to strike multiple enemies as many times as possible, but I'd also like to be able to just engage the enemies so that they don't guarantee their crits. Let's pull up right here, and then we're going to use the relentless charge. It's only going to hit 1, but it does put us right next to the enemy leader. We get the crit, we apply slowdown, we end next to the enemy, giving us fury. We have protection up because we have at least 2 enemies within the radius. We have 3. If we got the 4th, if this guy had not positioned it just out of the way, then we would be also gaining brutality. Here we're just going to engage the leader, even though we could potentially swing over to be able to strike the extra enemy. If you strike multiple enemies, you do not engage with any of them, and we definitely want to be engaging this enemy leader. Odo is surrounded and poisoned, which might look like a bad situation, but hey, when you're a Vanguard with relentless charge to be able to just disengage at will, it's not nearly so bad. We are starting a new round here, and as I said, we can just Vanguard charge out of this bad situation. And the beautiful thing is, if the battle had turned even more against us, you were fighting a harder group of enemies or didn't have as high a armor value, the relentless charge is going to apply slowdown, meaning that if you charge away and then use your movement, you will be able to fully kite the enemies because they have no chance of being able to catch up to you. So now that they have kindly all walked into range of my hammer swing, we will clean them out right here, apply the bleeding across, and then we'll use the charge, come across, kill another enemy, slow down this marauder, gain fury, which I believe, yes, that will carry over into it's going to carry over into our next round, and then we're going to want to be able to put a little bit of distance on this guy, and it doesn't have to be much now that he's slowed down. We can just hang out right by this rock and he won't be able to reach us. Oh yes, you wanted to be able to hit me while I was surrounded. Well, we have really turned things around on him. And here we still have protection because this 6-meter radius for opportunism, it's enough to be able to really do some great things. Now Odo is galvanized and we're just looking for a spectacular finish to this battle. Come across, score the kill. Relentless charge, not really going to be a damage focused ability. Obviously it does have decent damage if you're going to be proccing against multiple enemies. They're getting the 21. Its ratio on strength is not great, but its kiting potential and its freedom to get you all around the battlefield to score big swings with your primary weapon is really valuable. I think this build can be a lot of fun and will operate well if you have him out on a flank, protecting the rest of your units, able to kite around, slow the enemies down, and just be so durable with his opportunism and the ability to break out of dangerous situations with relentless charge that he can really slow them down. Or if you want him in a more extended combat with those enemies, give him a really tanky ally on that side that will draw the enemies into a clump, and then he's going to be able to get a lot of those hits against multiple enemies depending on his weapon choice and lining up really solid relentless charges. The final specialization we have to grab here is Destroyer. Grabbing this gave us an extra 12 Constitution, giving him really high health and carrying capacity. We'll grab Valorous Duel and Armor Breaker. I don't know if Armor Breaker is really the passive that I would usually grab with this build, but I want to be able to showcase everything. Overall, this build could be called Old Reliable because you get so much value out of Weakening Blow in pretty much any situation. Valorous Duel across a long battle or a lot of battles is going to be giving you tons of Valor points, probably the most reliable way to be gaining Valor points. And Armor Breaker, it's not flashy, but it does boost your damage quite reliably. Weakening Blow will deal 22 to 28 damage to the target and applies weakening for 3 rounds. So this means that we're getting 80 to 100% strength damage, which that alone is pretty solid for 1 Valor point. Being able to have that additional attack to amp up the DPS, especially when you're using a two-handed weapon that is increasing your strength by quite a bit, you get decent damage output out of this. But then weakening is going to reduce the damage output of the enemy you strike by 50%, and it applies it for 3 rounds, which is an eternity here in Wartales. I feel like this ability would be worth it, even if it only applied weakening for 1 round, because the idea is then that you go on applying it again on your next turn. But as we take the skill mastery for Weakening Blow, if the enemy is already weakened, we also apply vulnerability. This is the jaw-dropping, enormous improvement for skill mastery. The other 2 skills, you could probably just take it or leave it on their skill mastery improvements, but this one, vulnerability, is amazing. The next attack suffered will be a critical hit. Being able to guarantee the next hit against an enemy is a crit, opens up some insane synergies with other companions. We've got the Brute over here with Rampage, that when they crit, then they gain Fury, doing even more damage as they roll through attacks. Another great companion is the Ranger. They absolutely thrive on bursts of critical damage, and especially assassin builds with right between the eyes. Your damage is doubled if the target is already bleeding, which if the Brute is using this Legion Hammer, they are guaranteed almost to be bleeding. And if you master this skill, the critical damage of the attack is increased by 30%, meaning you get some insane finishing blows coming out of this if that target is both bleeding and vulnerable, which is the exact setup that Odo is going to be giving. Finally, you have the Archer. Most bows, okay, the stylish bow is not going to show it off very well, but most bows have a really high variance in how much damage they are going to do. When you crit, you're guaranteed to hit the ceiling of their damage, which is really high compared to other characters. So overall, being able to give crits over to your archers is going to be amazing. And let's not forget the Warbow, which is used by the captains of the guard groups. Now, finding this, it's a very elusive drop, but if you get it, you get a second attack when you crit. Our passive here, Armor Breaker, damage inflicted to armor is increased by 25%, and when we master it, if an attack from this unit destroys the enemy armor, the unit gains Brutality and Inspiration. Inspiration doubling our movement, and Brutality increasing our damage. I don't put too much value on Inspiration. Brutality is obviously nice, but I don't see this triggering too often. Obviously, we're going to have attacks that fully break the enemy's armor, so we are going to be gaining the benefit out of this, but the main value that I see here is that we are increasing our damage against armor. The way that we have seen enemies progress from level 1 to 5 is that the effective health pool of the armor bar has grown faster than the effective health pool of just the hit points. This is mostly because as we reach the higher level armors, we get a higher and higher guard value, which is really going to amp up the effective health pool, quote unquote effective health pool of that armor bar. Once that's broken, you lose the guard, and then you cut through enemies' actual hit points very quickly. If this trend continues as they add the levels 7 and 9, and potentially even more as the game continues to develop, then being able to really put out high damage to break through the enemy's armor is going to be crucial. The Brute, with their weapon options gets even more increased damage when striking enemies on the armor. Obviously, the trend with the hammers is that you're getting something when you're attacking enemy armor, either more damage, status effects, etc. So they are going to quote-unquote try to brute force their way through the enemy's armor, and then your other options are trying to find a destabilization option or just use really high status effects to kill them before you have to break down the armor at all. We are once again sparring against a group of enemy guards, and the goal here is to have Odo fight in tandem with both Snipe, because he's carrying the crit bow, and Loki potentially with his right between the eyes. Now Odo has been given taunt, so he can trigger the scoring vulnerability off of weakening blow himself, but I think that the best way to set things up is actually going to be to drag our swordsmen into things as well, because they have taunt. So we'll use the taunt over here to be able to get the weakening applied, and now we also get to utilize destabilizing strike to pull the guard value off of the enemy's armor. Now we can move up with Odo, use weakening below to be able to get vulnerability applied over here, and those extra stacks of weakening. And then we could choose if we wanted to use pound. If we use pound here, we would break the armor, which would, off of armor breaker, be able to give us brutality and inspiration. I don't necessarily know if we want to do that, because we could, in the terms of this battle situation, I want to just be able to engage this phalanx soldier so that he's not able to destabilize either of our units. All right, who do we want to see throw up the mega crit? I mean, I was hyping up the synergy with Snipe, our archer here, so let's do it. All right, my boy, it is your time to shine, point blank. I moved him up because he'll generate valor points if he is next to an ally. Here's the crit. 36 damage on the crit into another crit, and it doesn't keep on going forever, but when he crits, he does apply bleeding. So there we go. We get really good damage out of Snipe. I mean, what was that? That was 72 damage out of his basic attack, no valor points spent, and the full combo is on beautiful display. Can we just finish him off? Aowen, can you just kill him with this tactical strike? No? Okay, well, the damage over time will get him. Now, if you guys didn't already believe that the Berserker was the best class, or at least that Splitter's not an overpowered weapon, so we have 3 units over here all combining for perfect synergy to be able to cut this guy down to 9 health and have him finished off with status effects after he takes his turn. Meanwhile, Axe's opponent is just dead. Okay, now I kind of want to see what the Assassin Loki is able to do if he is served up a crit on a golden platter. So right now we don't have any instances of weakening applied. We're going to have to dip into the Valor Point Bank to be able to show this off, but I think it's worth it. Alright, Loki, guaranteed to crit here. 48 damage and applying bleeding. If they'd already been bleeding, we would have gotten even a little bit more damage out of him, because we get double damage on right between the eyes if the target is already bleeding. The thing is, because we switched out the main hand weapon on Odo, we're not getting the applications of bleeding as reliably as we had been in the other combat showcases. Alright, Snipe, I'm kind of hoping you redeem yourself here. Yeah, score the crit. Oh, he does it again. That's even without the guaranteed crit to start up. Let's go. He even got the double crit, partly because he's able to hit the enemy from behind. Maybe that bow is not so bad. Alright, Odo, it is you versus the captain. We have now been galvanized, so our damage numbers are going to be insane. Use pound to weaken that armor. She doesn't have any guard value because just light armor. Oh, we can apply burning. And then we crit and apply vulnerability. Alright. Well, Snipe, take us home. What does a galvanized crit look like? Whoa. We get the animation, 54 damage. So there we've been able to showcase all the specializations for the Brute. I think all of them are fully viable. The Vanguard is your most tactically interesting. You really need to be on your A game and be ready to kite enemies out to get a lot of value out of it. The Smasher is extremely Valor Point hungry and damage focused, but it really can put up the damage numbers to back up that Valor Point cost. And then the Destroyer with Weakening Blow is just probably the most reliable and the most straightforward build for the Brute that you can grab. For the save that I'm going to keep, I'm going to go Smasher. I hyped that build up so much in the very beginning. I feel like it's just so much fun, and I'm going to lock it in here for Odo. Looking at equipment options, the Legion two-handed hammer is certainly my favorite because it's going to be able to do decent damage. You get a full 360 area of effect, and you're applying bleeding, which does so much work for you on the enemy's turns. Lucilla is your legendary weapon option. You can pick this up after you defeat Matthias Lund, the champion in Tiltrin. It promises insane damage, but does so on a turn delay, so it is fairly finicky to be able to use. The best advice I can give for Lucilla is trying to use your character last on one round so you're able to get into a position to strike multiple enemies and then use them first on the following round before the enemies are able to disperse and just leave your zone of influence. I put a much higher value on immediate damage as opposed to this form of delayed damage, so this is one of the legendary options that you might not find yourself equipping. To cover a few final considerations for the Brute, the best occupations are going to be Smith, Cook, or Miner. They all provide a different balance of Constitution and Strength, which are the key stats for your Brute. For the general skills you want them to have, you of course want Wrath, and then I feel like Sprint, Taunt, and First Aid all depend on your playstyle and the exact builds that you are going for. Because I favor the big two-handed weapons and medium armor, the defense level for my Brute is not the highest, so I like being able to patch that up with leather straps, increasing guard by 5%, though you could equally get mileage out of something like adjustable straps to increase their movement, or if you are going for really crit-heavy builds, there's going to be some unique talismans here that are going to really increase your crit damage. That is everything for the Brute. Leave a like if you enjoyed the guide, comment on what your strongest build and favorite weapon has been, and subscribe if you want to see the future guides as soon as they come out. Till then, thank you guys for watching and have a good one.